It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. In 1945, so the story goes, the owner of Chicago's Billy Goat Tavern tried to get his pet goat into a baseball game at Wrigley Field. It was the 1945 World Series, and William Cianis was hoping to bring the Chicago Cubs some good luck and his tavern some publicity. As one version of the story has it, after some back and forth that went all the way up to the Cubs owner, the club let Cianis in, but not his goat. In a fit of anger, he declared, "The Cubs ain't gonna win no more." The team went on to lose that World Series, and it would be 71 years before they appeared in another and then won it for the first time in more than a century. It came to be called the Curse of the Billy Goat. Now, it's worth noting Cianis' family and the Cubs' official historian both dispute that account. Still, the incident and its aftermath have become part of the lore and mythology of baseball, a sport full of superstitions and rituals. To journalist Addy Baird, it's those stories that give the sport a feeling of magic. Addy makes her living as a political reporter. She currently writes for the Salt Lake Tribune in Utah, and in the past has reported for Politico, BuzzFeed News, and other outlets. And last month saw publication of her new book, The Magical Game, The Spirit and History of Baseball's Superstitions, Rituals, and Curses. Addie's with us for the rest of the hour. Addie, welcome to the 21st show. Thanks for being here.
Hi. It's great to be here.
All right, listeners, in order to make schedules meet, we spoke with Addie Wednesday afternoon. Because of that, no calls for this part of the show, but you can let us know what you think anytime. Our email address is talk@21stshow.org. All right, you write quite a bit about the curse of the Billy Goat in your book. You've done the research. What's your understanding of what actually happened that day?
This is a really good question. This was one of my main questions when I embarked on the project of this book. And as you mentioned, I talked to both the descendants of William Cianis and to the Cubs official historian. And the Cubs official historian, I think, tells the version of this story that is truest to the facts. And I say truest to the facts because I talk in the book about how there's truth to mythology. It's something that we want to believe in sort of the version of the story that's become famous. But the Cubs official historian talks about how when William Cianis came to the game on this fated day, he actually got the goat inside. And so that's kind of where these stories kind of fundamentally break down. And there's actually photographs of this. There's photographs of Cianis walking this goat on the field. and it was him walking it on the field. And by the way, it had been a rainy day and the goat had gotten wet. And by the time he's walking the goat on the field, it had started to dry up. But you can imagine how like a goat that was once wet, that hasn't been like washed, starts to dry and it's stinky. And that also
fragrant is the word that comes to mind, yes.
It's fragrant. And that contributes to this curse because the National League president was actually sitting right in like the area where Cianis is parading this smelly goat on the field. And they were so embarrassed about this, they being kind of management at large and the stadium and the Cubs are so embarrassed by this in front of the head of the National League in which they play. And it's that then they actually kick the goat out. And so there's this, they had threatened to arrest him for trespassing, by the way. So there's this kind of initial tension in the story that we wash over in the way that we kind of tell the lore now. But that is my understanding from, the team's historian, the photographs that we have, the newspaper articles at the time of what really happened on this fateful day. And the other thing to note is that there was no talk of a curse at this time. It was not actually, Cianis apparently sent this telegram, it's real, saying, the Cubs will never win on my watch, essentially. But he doesn't say, like, I curse you. There's no immediate, like, they're cursed by this bar owner. That comes later as sort of banter in the newspapers with his friend who's a columnist. But it's a telling story about how we like to form the myths and form the stories of our curses that's challenged a bit by the history of it.
Truthiness, as Colbert once put it.
Totally.
Yeah, talk more about what actually did cause this lore or myth to sort of take hold.
Yeah, so Siennis has a friend who's a columnist at the paper. And when the Cubs actually started to have some hope, about 2 decades later, it's 15, 20 years later, the Cubs really have some hope to play well and maybe go to the World Series. And David Condon writes in the paper about this kind of feud between this bar owner and the team owner, and kind of tells this story that it's they've been cursed, and the Cubs playing so well has actually made the two of them make up, and there's hope and there's faith, and then the Cubs collapse. So the question is like, well, is it Siennis's fault? Is it, it becomes this banter in the newspaper, and Condon is Siennis's friend. He comes into the bar. There's so many journalists like to drink in this bar of his, and that I think is very key for this story, that it's a reporter's bar.
Yeah. I think the simpler explanation as a born and raised Southsider and White Sox fan is that the Cubs just stink. So what can you do? The White Sox though had go ahead.
Siennis actually says the same thing. He gets asked after the Cubs collapse if he has cursed the Cubs, and he says the Cubs curse themselves.
A lot of that going around these days. Of course, the White Sox have their own curse of the Black Sox. That took 90
Yeah.
years to break. And it's not even unique to American baseball. You write about a team in Japan that spent decades dealing with its own curse after throwing a statue of Colonel Sanders from Kentucky Fried Chicken into a river. Talk about how just the idea of a curse can bring about failure.
Yeah. Well, this is something that I talked about with the Cubs official historian, is this feeling that, he said, if you believe you're cursed, you're cursed. And I think that's it. I think in the book, I look at a whole series of curses. As you mentioned, there's a team in Japan that throws a statue from KFC into the river, and it becomes this kind of piece of lore similar to this lore that surrounds the Cubs of the Billy Goat. And the team's official historian said, if you believe that something is going to go wrong, something will go wrong. And what could be more cursed than that feeling of foreboding that kind of haunts you? And the longer it goes on with the Cubs, it's 108 years, when you're 99 years into this bad luck, into this like very entrenched story, you start to believe it.
All right, we are going to take a break on the program. We'll continue with Addy Baird. Her book is The Magical Game, The Spirit and History of Baseball's Superstitions, Rituals, and Curses. She's also a political reporter, now at the Salt Lake Tribune. We're on tape today, so no calls, but our voicemail line is 217-300-2121. 217-300-2121. We'll have more after a short break. This is the 21st show. Stay with us.
Hey, hey, holy mackerel, no doubt about it, the Cubs are on their way. Hey, hey, the Cubs are gonna hit today, they're gonna pitch today, they're gonna field today. Come what may, the Cubs are gonna win today. Hey, hey, holy mackerel, no doubt about it, the Cubs are on their way. They got the hustle, they got the muscle, the Chicago Cubs are on their way.
It's the 21st show. I'm Brian Mackey. We're talking about the myths, legends, and superstitions of baseball. Addy Baird is the author of a book about all of that. It's called The Magical Game, The Spirit and History of Baseball's Superstitions, Rituals, and Curses. We heard a first-hand account of this from our texting group. You can join, by the way, by sending the word TALK to 217-803-0730. Franny in Hinckley, Illinois, says there's probably a million moms in Illinois with similar stories. When my son's high school baseball team was on a winning streak, he would not let me wash his baseball socks. He didn't want me washing the good luck out of them. Again, we taped this conversation with Addy on Wednesday, so no calls, but let us know what you thought. Talk at 21stshow.org. All right, Eddie, your day job, political journalist. You mentioned in the acknowledgments that when you told your agent you had a book idea, I'm sure she thought, hoped even, that it was going to be a politics book. You write. So, what inspired you, as a self-described converted baseball fan, to write a book about baseball?
Well, first of all, I love that you read the acknowledgments. I think that I feel like there's such little special treasures and gems from authors that get skipped over. So I appreciate the acknowledgments shout out. There's a lot of really special people in there. But yes, my agent is one of them. And it's interesting. It's like um, I don't know. I think maybe if you're listening to this and you're a writer, you might understand this feeling. But like ever since I was a kid, I wanted to write a book. It's like I read under my blanket at night with a flashlight, genuinely. But I was working as a political reporter at BuzzFeed News, and I was covering Congress. I covered two impeachments in 2 years. I covered a pandemic. I covered mass shootings, and I was really burnt out. And they restructured the newsroom, and I left. And that kind of feeling of being a kid who just wanted to like write and read books more than anything was like really bubbling up in me. And I started calling my friends who were authors and asking for their advice about how to approach a book. And I was thinking about writing a politics book because it was just what I knew best and have always written about. And a friend of mine said, "You have to write about something you really like." And the truth is, politics is like important, but I don't like it.
Interesting.
And I thought, what do I really like? And the answer was baseball and its magic. And I am a converted baseball fan. I fell in love at a really special game when I was in college, which is a long story that you can read about in the book. It's very special. But I also started to discover that even, in baseball, there was this magical culture, and I've always been interested in that. I've been interested in astrology and magic, and ever since I was a kid. And so it all kind of came together in this moment that felt very magical for me, so to speak, to get to write this book about essentially my like passion project, my kind of hyperfixation that was, I was able to use my work as a reporter and my ability to like approach a longer reporting project to the book. But I got to turn that kind of approach on something that I've never until now written about. So it was really special.
What is it that makes baseball more magic than, say, basketball or, professional ultimate frisbee or any of the many other sports out there?
That was basically my number one reporting question. And I think there's several answers. The first is there's a lot of research that shows that in sports where there's less scoring, there's a higher luck factor. So basketball, of our four major North American sports, has the lowest luck factor. And in a series of 7 games between two teams, 80% of the time, the team that is the better team by record is going to emerge. That is not true in baseball. There is such a luck factor. To get that same 80% best team advances figure out of baseball teams, I'm not joking, would have to play like series of 80 games because there's so much luck and so much variability in baseball. It's not just about skill because it's lower scoring. So that is part of it. The other thing is that baseball has a really strange structure compared to our other four major North American sports, in that the defense and the offense are imbalanced, and the defense has the ball. And this creates a huge disadvantage for players on the offensive. And as anyone who has paid any attention to baseball in their life can sense, baseball is a game predicated on failure. We see amazing players fail 7 in 10 times. And that also breeds a magical culture. We know from the history of research about superstition and magical thinking and magical practice that people engage in magic when the outcome is uncertain. And it's a way of maintaining at least a feeling of control over an uncontrollable situation. And I think baseball, every single one of those little pieces comes together for this puzzle that I think just really appeals to the magical thinking and the pattern recognition that we are really primed to do as human beings. And I think it's that kind of whole cocktail of things that results in this really magical game.
I love that you talked about the role of luck there. And you think about it, like you said, premised on failure. This is a sport where someone who's batting 300, right? They're getting a base hit 30% of their at bats. That's considered elite, all star level.
Yeah.
You're still failing 70% of the time at your
Yeah.
job. And what other job would let you do that? I don't think your employers would allow that sort of failure, right?
No way.
So So one of the ways that baseball players like to, I mentioned the mom not washing her son's socks, right? And that's the superstitions. And players have many of them. They always warm up at the same time. They drink the same, brand of coffee, same shirt, same socks. What is it about baseball, that lends itself to these superstitions beyond the role of luck?
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I think you're getting at kind of this other little aspect of it, which is that baseball is a daily game. We know from the studies of superstition and the psychology of superstition that we're more likely to develop superstition about things that are happening over and over again. So the fact that there's a baseball game almost every single day from like April to November is part of what creates this sense for players and for fans that you're repeating the superstition because the thing itself is frequently repeated. And this goes on down through a baseball game. Players who have at-bat superstitions, not only are they playing baseball basically every day, they're seeing, 10 pitches in maybe up to like 10 pitches in an at-bat. And in that case, maybe dozens of pitches over the course of a game, that creates again this feeling that there's some value in repeating the superstition because you're frequently finding yourself in a situation where maybe it's helpful. And there is this real body of research that says, at least for athletes, it can be helpful, and that it gives a player a sense of confidence to perform a ritual. It gives a player a feeling that they are prepared and protected in what they're about to embark on. And that has a measurable, real effect on performance. Whether you think that's, supernatural magic in action, I think is where people really get lost. But the real psychological benefit is there and documented.
Well, even the most skeptical among us can say the placebo effect can be real in certain instances. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So baseball has arguably, though, been losing some of its magic, right? And what's made it unique for almost as long as it's existed. Talk about that undercurrent in baseball history.
The description of it as an undercurrent in baseball history is perfect. And I will be totally honest with your listeners. When I pitched this book, I pitched a chapter about the magic being dead. And this was right before Major League Baseball that I pitched this book. Major League Baseball was about to implement a pitch clock, and I was really against a pitch clock. And I proposed a chapter in this book about how it was destroying what makes baseball magical. Because for me, a lot of what makes baseball magical is the way that a baseball game exists outside of time. There's no clock, and I felt like the pitch clock would imperil that magic. And I started doing my research about this question of baseball dying. And I encountered something really interesting, which was that people have been saying that baseball is dying for like 150 years. And it's still here. And I really went down this rabbit hole. One of the earliest examples that we have is from the 1860s of a player talking about how baseball players don't play ball like they used to, quote unquote, and that other forces controlled the game. And he was referring to the influence of gambling on the sport and that it had killed the magic of when he was young and people played for the joy of it. And it was so funny because it's basically this cycle that I encountered every decade or so of someone saying baseball is dead, baseball is actually back, baseball is dying, the magic is dead, even if the business of baseball is healthy. And I thought, well, surely I can't argue that baseball is dying and that the magic is dead, if people have been saying that for so long and it keeps surviving. And I'm out here writing a book about the very magic of it. And then I watched the pitch clock get implemented. And I was really surprised. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time, and I lived not far from Nats Stadium. And I loved going to games, but I wouldn't really go on weeknights because I would end up getting home at like 11:30 and it was too late and I had to work the next morning. And the season that they implemented the pitch clock, all of a sudden games were significantly shorter. And without really thinking about it, I started going to weeknight games more often. And I was like, isn't this funny that my complaint was that the pitch clock would make less baseball and thus less magic? And it's actually brought more baseball into my life. And it really challenged my thinking about the impact on the game. And I have complaints about baseball. Like that's also part of the tradition for people who love baseball is to complain about baseball. It really is. But I really changed my mind on this. And part of it was seeing it implemented today and the way that it brought more fans, it brought younger fans. It actually meant more time for me in the game. And when I was looking back through baseball history, I noticed something too, which was that the early descriptions of the game are of the game having vim to it and having an alacrity to it and that you couldn't get out of your seat for fear of missing something, which doesn't really sound like the baseball we know. But I was talking to a friend about the pitch clock and he was like, I feel like I can't go get a beer or I miss half an inning. And I realized that the pitch clock was actually bringing us, if our goal is to keep baseball kind of like pure and classic, that the pitch clock actually started to sound a bit more like the early descriptions of the game that I had encountered over the course of my research about this question of the game's death. And that really challenged my assumptions for me as well. So I think this is part of what makes baseball so special is that the history is so rich and it's just interesting to encounter yourself in it. You know, I felt like I was this very modern baseball fan and I started to complain about the pitch clock and look back through the history and I saw myself.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time together, and I want to end by asking you, we're now, 20 years into the Moneyball era, give or take, right? Maybe even 25. Anyone can go on their phone, look up a player's stats throughout their whole career. What is it that keeps us attached to these rituals, these stories, these superstitions?
Well, we talked about luck a little bit earlier, and I was talking to some sabermetricians, people who are experts in baseball statistics while I was writing this book. And one of them pointed out to me that you could do the stats perfectly, and you will never actually know the outcome of the game. You can never actually exactly accurately predict how a game is going to go. I was watching the Mets last night, which I still do, despite it all, and Cubs fans will understand. And they ended up playing this bizarre game. They lost 16-12. They were at one point up like 9-4. And it was so random. And I had the thought, like, how could we analytically ever predict this game? And I think that's what keeps us coming back. And it's what keeps the magic alive, that there's this element of luck and randomness. And it feels like there's like this thread of fate running through the game, which the Mets announcers said last night. They said when the Mets were up, Gary Cohen said only fate could take this win from the Mets, and I thought it will. And I think that's what keeps it alive, is that we can never really know, and in that way, it's this sort of mystery that we encounter every single day, every single summer.
Addy Baird, the book is The Magical Game, The Spirit and History of Baseball's Superstitions, Rituals, and Curses. It's available now from St. Martin's Press. Addy, thanks so much for sharing your work with us today on the 21st Show.
Thank you.
That is it for us today and this week. The 21st Show is a production of Illinois Public Media. I'm Brian Mackey. Thanks for listening. We'll talk with you again on Monday.